Can everyone hear me all right? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I need to plug in my headphones first. Hold on. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. This is going to be coding from scratch. Week 2, we'll be going over JavaScript, the terminal, and source control. So let's go ahead and begin. All right. So what is JavaScript? JavaScript is the programming language of the web. It is the only programming language understood by every modern web browser. JavaScript enables us to build the interactive websites we use daily. So essentially, JavaScript is the muscle of a website. You can think of it as the thing that allows us to do cool things with the website. The interactiveness of a website is due to JavaScript. So in order to connect JavaScript to an HTML file, you're going to be using a script tag, and it's broken down like this. You have your opening and closing script tag, and then inside of the script tag, you have your attribute source, and you set that equal to the file pathway to your JavaScript file. So if we're looking at code here, let's go ahead and make a project real quick so we can see. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it example.js. And then I'm going to go back to my text editor, Atom, and I'm going to open. And let's go to the desktop, example.js. Okay, we're opening it, and then I'm going to create a new file, index.html. Let's have some HTML in there. And then I'll have a new file, and I'll do script.js. So now we have 2 files in my project folder, index.html and script.js. Note that the name of these can be whatever you like them to be. And in order to link my JavaScript file to my HTML file, at the bottom of my body, so just before the closing tag, I'm going to do script source equals name of the file. And then I'm just going to close that up. Okay, so now these two are connected. So whatever code I write in my JavaScript file can now interact with my HTML file. Okay. With the JavaScript, there are variables. You can think of variables as containers. They hold value, so we can use it throughout our websites. When declaring a variable in JavaScript, we use the var keyword followed by the name of the variable. There are different types of variables. We have strings, numbers, booleans, and objects. So if we're looking at this example right here, we see the variable declaration is set here with var. We have student name, which is our variable name, and then we set it equal to some value. In this case, it is equal to Ricardo in quotations, which means this is of type string. The string is essentially a string of characters. So these are all characters on a keyboard, and then it's surrounded by quotes to indicate it's a string. And then you have your semicolon to indicate the end of a statement. So if we wanted this to be of number value, then we set it equal to a number like 500, for example. If you wanted a Boolean, it's true or false. And objects we'll cover later on when you get into programming foundations. All right, so let's go ahead and declare some variables here. Let's say in my script.js, I have a variable wallet, and I'm going to set it equal to, let's say 300, okay? And this is going to represent the total amount of dollars I have in my wallet. So maybe I want to make a comment on here, total amount of money, I'll comment that out. So now I know var wallet is equal to the total amount of money. If I wanted to do a Boolean, you can say, let's say we have is affordable And let's say we set that equal to true. A string would be, let's say, our type of shoe, and then I'll set it equal to Nike. So this is a number, Boolean, string. Okay, so those are the different types of values that you can have for a variable. With that, you will then be using if statements. If statements are essentially used whenever you need to make a decision. So let's take an example of you're wanting to buy a pair of shoes, right? So the way that an if statement is written is if, the keyword if, and then you have your parentheses. Inside of the parentheses is going to be the conditional expression. And then it's followed by curly brackets, and then inside the curly brackets is the code that you want to execute if whatever is in this green lettering turns out to be true. So let's look at an example. So let's say I wanted to buy a pair of shoes only if they're Nikes, right? So if I say if type of shoe is equal, and you do, so you'll see a difference between 3 equal signs and 2 equal signs. 3 equal signs that make sure that you're comparing the value as well as the type of data. 2 equal signs is just going to look at the value and not the type. So in safe practice, use 3. So if type of shoe is equal to Nike, then I'm going to purchase the shoe. So then I will decrease my wallet amount by $100. So then wallet is equal to wallet minus 100. Oops. Right, and we can even take it back one if we wanted to go ahead and use the cost of shoe as a variable. So maybe the cost of shoe is something that will be forever changing, right? So let's say the cost of shoe is 100, and this leads for cleaner code, right? So let's say the cost of shoe changes over time, and it goes from 100 to 200. Well, every time you wrote 100, whenever you're using cost of shoe, you're gonna have to go around and rewrite 200 or 300, or whatever the cost is going to be. Instead, we're going to make it a variable. So if the cost of shoe changes, I only have to change it in one place. So let's say it changed to 150. I only have to change it here. So that's where variables are used as containers. So if the type of shoe is Nike, then I'm going to subtract the cost of shoe from my wallet and update my wallet. So now I'm going to console log my wallet. Okay, so if we check out our code, we can open this up in Chrome, for example. So open with Google Chrome. We open this up. We see nothing's here, right? We didn't write any HTML. So I'm going to inspect and then hit console. And we see this number. That's where the console log comes in. So I'm console logging my wallet. Since this type of shoe is Nike, we subtracted the cost of the shoe from the wallet amount, and then we updated the wallet cost. I mean the wallet amount. So now we have 200. Now let's say we're looking for Pumas. So if type of shoe, then we're going to go ahead and do the same. Let's go ahead and refresh. And we see nothing happens, right? Nothing was written onto the console. The reason why this happens is because this turned out to be false. So since this is false, all of this code is skipped. It'll move down to the next line of code. Since there was no line of code here, it was done. So let's say we console.log wallet here. And we go back and we refresh, and we see it's 300. Since that returned false, then this code block is how you'll hear it referred to, does not occur, and we just go down here. Now that's just a plain old if statement. Let's say you wanted to check a different condition, right? You have multiple conditions to check. So you could use if, else if. Okay, so with that, you would do if this happens, then we're going to go ahead and do this. Otherwise, we're going to check something else. Else if cost of shoe is less than 50, we are going to buy 2 pairs. So what we'll do is we'll do wallet equals wallet minus 2 times cost of shoe, and then we'll console.log wallet. So let's see what happens here. Before we see, does anyone know what's going to happen? Anyone want to take a guess? Let's look back at the code.
I was going to say, like, we don't really have Puma defined.
Right, so we're checking to see if it is equal to Puma. It's not equal to Puma, right? It's equal to Nike. So this isn't going to happen. Right? This whole thing isn't going to happen. Everything in this code block, not going to happen. So we're going to check something else. Okay, well, if it's not Puma, is it less than 50 bucks? Is it less than $50?
I don't think that parameter is set, is it?
Well, cost of shoe right here. We're checking cost of shoe, and we're seeing if it's less than 50. Cost of shoe is 100. So this is false too. Nothing's going to happen here either. So what we should see is no result. Now, if I change the cost of shoe to, let's say, 20 bucks, then we're going to see here, this is still false, so it's going to skip all this code. Now we're checking to see if cost of shoe is less than 50. It's $20, so that is less than 50. So this code is going to then execute. Now we're going to set wallet equal to wallet, which is 300, minus 2 times the cost of shoe, because we're buying 2 pairs. And there we would have 2 times 20 is 40. So we'll have 300 minus 40, which should give us 260 when we console log. So let's see if that's true. 260. Okay. Now, let's say you're checking a few things, right? You want to check if this is true, or if this is true, then do this. If none of them are true, you can go ahead and do, all right, well, if none of those cases fall to be true, then we're just going to go ahead and console log go home and save your money. Okay, so I'm going to change the cost of shoe to be 70 so that this can run. And we see it says go home and save your money. All right, so let's take a look at the code and see if anyone has any questions.
Cassandra, I have a question for you.
Yep.
So I think my biggest issue getting into JavaScript is I was waiting for, it seems to me like all the code we're writing is stuff that we already know. So we're telling the computer things that we know. Whereas I think my hang up was a lot of times this would come into play, it seems to me, is if we were, let's say we had a page and we were waiting on a user to like on a list, you know, do
Mhm.
what shoe do you like? Nike, Puma, Reebok, and then this comes into play because we already know all the answers to the things we're setting. The
Right.
variable to me really comes in with the input that we would get from someone else.
Right. And that's where the DOM comes into effect. So I don't know if you've hit that lesson yet,
Yeah.
but once you hit the DOM, that's when you start interacting with the users. So we're going to cover that towards the end of the lecture, because then you're going to have to write some code and incorporate IDs with HTML in order to get that information. So let's say you have like an input that says like fill out a form for what kind of shoe you want, and they put Nike, and once they hit that submit button that you create, it's going to trigger your JavaScript to do whatever you need it to do with that information. But
Right. Okay.
we'll cover that a little bit later. Any questions on the if, else statements? So if I say, let's say, all right, so it seems like everyone's all right with this. This is going to be very important. You're going to be using if statements like crazy. You're going to be checking conditions and things like that. So I want to make sure that you guys are comfortable with if, and else.
I guess I have one more question.
Yeah.
Really, so our if statement, you've got like, I guess, so type of shoe. That's something you made up. It's not a command that the
Right. These are
computer
all
actually.
variables that I declared. So if I never had this, okay, so let's say I remove that completely. Actually, let me just comment it out. So let's say we don't have that, and I click save and I run it. Console log shows an error. Type of shoe is not defined. And then it tells you what line it's at. So line 7. So here we're using the variable of type of shoe, but our error says type of shoe is not defined. So this is also going to be really good for you when you're debugging. You're going to be like, oh, okay, let me look up the code. Oh, I forgot to uncomment this out, or I forgot to declare that variable. So all of these are variables that we're using. What you see in these other colors, like the purple and the yellow and the blue and things like that, that's predefined, right? So console log is predefined in JavaScript. The var keyword, if, else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Okay.
like, you know, I think just HTML and CSS in general are so like specific with their commands, and then when you get into JavaScript, it's a lot of like, you're like, wait, is cost of shoe something I need to remember? Or, so yeah, I think that the more you get in, especially get into the DOM stuff, it's kind of knowing what are the
Yeah,
actual commands of Java.
right. And that goes back to what we discussed last week when we were thinking like a program. What information do we have, and what steps do we need to take to get to our goal? So when we're looking at that, we can see, okay, I don't have this information, or I need to wrap this information in a variable because it could be changing, or I need to use this here. And once you kind of write it out, it will help you decide, okay, what's a variable? What is a function? When do I need to use an if statement? Things like that. So last week when we had discussed counting the total number of dollar bills, right? We needed to use an if statement there, right? We knew that we had to loop through the wallet and check if bill is equal to $1, then do something, right? Update the counter. So that's when you're kind of breaking everything down, and it kind of comes into place as to, okay, what do I need to use? I need to use an if here, I need a variable here, and things like that. All right. Any other last minute questions on if statements before I jump into arrays, excuse me. All right, we'll keep on trucking then. So we'll go ahead and jump into arrays. An array is a data structure that we use to store values. You can think of them as a collection of values, and you can use an array to store multiple values. So you can just think of it as a list. Now, arrays have to be of the same data type. You can't have, at least in JavaScript, not for all languages, but in JavaScript. So let's say we had, if we look at this array here, the way that we define an array is the same way we define a variable, var, the name of the variable, and then we set it equal to the value. Now with arrays, you use square brackets, and then you separate your items with a comma. So this is an array of strings, right? It's a list of fruit. With arrays, you have indexes, which are pointing to different parts of the array. So index are 0 base. So normally we count 1, 2, 3. We usually start with 1, right? But in programming, you start with 0. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the last index is 4, and the first index is 0 for this particular array. The length of an array is the number of total items in here. So we have, that's when you start counting with 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 items, that's the array length, but the last index is index 4 because we start off with 0. Ways to figure out the length of an array. So let's say you're given an array. You don't know the contents inside of it. You just say, hey, this array exists. Find out the length. There is a method that you can use in JavaScript called length, and you just put the array name dot length, and it will return the total number of elements in the array. Dot push is going to push whatever you put into the parentheses at the end of the array. So if there's another fruit, that you need to add, you can just do fruit array dot push, and then in the parentheses you'll put, let's say you wanted to add pomegranate. Then in the parentheses you'll put in quotations pomegranate, and then we'll put pomegranate at the end of the list. Dot pop is going to remove the last item. So if I did fruit array dot pop right now, it would remove grapes. So let's look at that in code. So I'm going to go ahead and comment all of this out, and then we'll look at some arrays. So let's say we have an array called groceries. I can't spell groceries. Someone help me with the spelling. Grocer. Hold on, I gotta Google this.
IES.
Thank you. Okay. Groceries. So then it's an array, so we're going to use square brackets. And then let's say I need milk, I need eggs, I need bacon, and I need, let's say, bananas. Okay, so here I am declaring my array groceries, and if I wanted to return the length, so let's say I have another variable called total items, and I want it to be the number of items I have on my grocery list. So I'm going to use the length method, so you'll do the name of the array dot length. Okay. Then if I wanted to console log that, we can go ahead and see. So now total items should equal the length of the array, and the length of the array is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. So we should expect a 4 on our console. So if we save that and go back here, we see 4. Okay, just as expected. Everything's working just fine. So
sorry,
now,
real quick, why is it 4 and not 3 since it's 0, 1, 2, 3?
because we're looking at the length. So what you're thinking of is index. So the last index is index 3. So if I wanted to print out the last index, right, console.log, I can figure out the last index because it's the total length minus 1. So if I say groceries at total items minus 1. So let's look at this for a second. Here, where we know that total items is the total length of our array, the total amount of elements, which is 4. We know that index the last index is always going to be the length minus 1. So that's here. We have the length minus 1. So we're looking at groceries at index 3. Okay, so groceries at index 3, 0, 1, 2, 3 should be bananas. So what we should see printed out on our console is 4 here and bananas here. So if we go back, refresh, that's exactly what we get, 4 and bananas. Now, if I wanted to add something to my grocery list, let's say, oh, I forgot peanuts. I'm going to do groceries dot push, then I'll have my parentheses, and then I'll have peanuts. Okay. Now I'm going to console.log groceries, and we should see peanuts at the end. And we have it there. So milk, eggs, bacon, bananas, peanuts. Cool, it added peanuts on the end. Now, if I did pop, it's going to remove peanuts, because remember, pop removes the last item on the array. So if we do that, peanuts should disappear. Okay. Peanuts is now gone. Any questions on this? Arrays, how we define them, how we use lengths, indexes, push, pop.
So basically we put console.log after each one of those push and like pop.
It's not necessary to do that. That's just for, for me to show you the results.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, so the console is just more like a debugging tool, just to check yourself. Like, okay, I'm doing all this stuff, but let me console log to make sure it's doing what I expect it to be doing.
Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on arrays? All right, we'll keep it moving then. So after arrays, we're going to go ahead and jump into loops. So loops enable us to repeat a series of commands until a certain condition is met. There are numerous different kinds of loops, but we're going to go ahead and focus on the for loop. So you'll have while loops, until loops, for in loops, for each loops, all sorts of different loops, but I'm just going to focus on the for loop because it is like the mother of all loops. You can essentially write any loop with a for loop. So the for loop, you have the keyword for, then you have your parentheses, and then there's 3 segments inside of those parentheses. The first segment is where you're declaring a variable that's going to essentially be your index for the loop. So we have var I equals 0. You can call this variable whatever you want. You just see I most commonly, short for index. Second, in your second segment, you'll have your condition. So as long as this condition is true, the loop will still be going. So just like if statements, we go back to an if statement. If this condition is true, this code will execute. So with loops, if this condition is true, this code will execute. And then the last segment we have is incrementing our index. So if you, now it could be I++ or I-. I++ means you're incrementing this variable by 1. Minus is decrementing the variable by 1, so -1. So if we look at this in real code, so you get a full feel for it here. So let's go ahead and comment those out. So now we're just looking at groceries and total items, right? So total items is going to equal our length. So if I wanted to check to see if there is bacon in my grocery list, so let's go ahead and create a for loop. So I'm creating a for loop because I have to go through every single item in the array to see if there's bacon, right? So I'm going to declare my index variable var I equals 0, and we usually choose 0 because that's where indexes start. There might be certain cases where you don't want to start at 0, but most commonly you will most likely always start at 0. And then let's say we need to go through the array, so we need to make sure I is less than the length of the array. So the length of the array is represented by the variable total items. So I less than total items. Okay. And then I'm gonna I plus plus. So what this is doing is we're starting off at 0. So here, 0. And then as long as I is less than total items, so total items is equal to 4. The last index number is 3. So once that index number hits 4, we know we're done because there isn't a 4th index. There's just 4 items. That's really important to remember the difference between items and lengths because that can get confusing at times. So here I'm going to go through the entire array and I'm going to say if groceries at index I is equal to bacon, we can say console.log bacon is on the list. Okay. Else, we need to add bacon, right? So I'm going to do else groceries dot push bacon. So essentially I want this actually. So actually let me run this because I know it's going to run into an error, but I want you to see it. All right, so then I'm going to console.log my groceries. So what do you think console.log groceries is going to output? Now go through the code in your head.
Nothing, because bacon is already on the list.
Okay, so you think nothing's going to happen? You think it'll just print out milk, eggs, bacon, bananas?
No, it'll say bacon is on the list.
Okay. Anyone else have a different answer?
Add an alert? Don't you have to add an alert first? Like, if bacon is on the list, don't you have to make the alert bacon is on the list, or no?
Alerts are just essentially like a pop-up, an alert. So console log, we're just checking the console. If you wanted to change console log into an alert, that's fine. It would just be a pop-up instead of looking at the console.
You're missing a semicolon, aren't you?
I am missing a semicolon. Good job. All right, let's see what's going to happen. Bacon, bacon, bacon. But bacon's on the list. And it says bacon is on the list. What happened here? Let's look at our code. So we're going through every single item. So we have this set up. Everyone understand this line, right? If you don't, let me know. No big deal if you don't. All right, so then in here, we're saying if groceries at index I. So at the very beginning, index I is 0, right? So we're looking at milk. Is milk equal to bacon? No. So we're pushing bacon because we're still inside of the loop here. Then it goes to eggs. Is eggs equal to bacon? No, it's not. So we pushed bacon again. Is bacon equal to bacon? Yes, it is. So bacon is on the list. And it does not push. But we're not done with the loop. We still have one more. Is bananas equal to bacon? No, it's not. So we pushed bacon again. So that's why we get bacon 3 times here. But that's not what we wanted, right? So this is where it's good to put console log in there to make sure that your outputs are what you want them to be, or your code is doing what you want it to do. But I didn't want it to do that. So I don't need to do this here. Yeah. Okay. So if I take that out, then we have just bacon is on the list and bacon is on there 1 time. Does that make sense as to why we got bacon 3 times and why we don't need that? All right. So that is loops. Now, if we want, that's looping through an array. Now, if you wanted like a simpler loop, you just wanted to count down some numbers. So we have var I is equal to 0. And then I want I want to count from 0 to 10. Now I'm doing 11 because we want 10 to print out. So we'll do I plus plus. And then we'll just do console.log I. And then we should expect that to print out 0 through 10. And then I'm going to save this. Let me comment this out. Comment that out. Okay. And there we have 0 through 10. Any questions on for loops? These are going to be your best friends / enemy, depending on how well you understand them.
So is there a solution to the problem you had? So we obviously got bacon is on the list, but to run the check, like as an if statement to say if bacon wasn't on the list, or let's say that we said is sugar on the list. Sugar wasn't there to add sugar. We could have done that. That would have been easy, I guess. It would have just done the same thing and checked to see if each one of those was sugar, but would it have added it 4 times since milk, eggs, bacon? It
depends, and that's where it depends where you put your code. So if you have put it in the loop, then it's going to add it that many number of times, right? If you put it outside of the loop, let's say we wanted to add sugar, just do groceries dot push.
Well, I'm talking about running a check to see.
Right.
Like you did with bacon.
Okay, so if you say, then you'll need something to keep track, and you'll have to check another statement, right? So let's say we had, let's say we had another variable called is bacon there, right? And we're going to make it a Boolean. Let's say it's true, right? And then in here, I'm going to say if something's equal to bacon, then is bacon there equal to true, right? And then let's say else let's see, let me think this through. Is bacon there? That's going to be true. Otherwise, if that doesn't print out, then we can say is bacon there equal to false.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I just didn't think this out. Because what we want to do essentially, and what I'm thinking in my head, is I need to check if bacon's there. And if bacon does not return, if I don't get bacon at all, I want to set this is bacon there to false. And then I can check if is bacon there. And if that's false, then we can do like groceries dot push bacon. Something like that. But we want this to be outside of the loop because we want this to be outside of the loop because otherwise it's going to push bacon 3 times. So something that you can do is create a function to check for bacon, and that will return either true or false. And then you can, and we'll go into functions next. So I can answer your question once we get into functions, because otherwise it's going to look like a lot of messy code. So let's solve that problem once we learn functions, which we're about to learn, okay? All right, so let's go to functions. So functions allow us, yep.
You had a question before you went on to loops in the chat. Somebody asked about the console log and pop.
What was the question? Let me see. Will it print out, pop the last item and print it to the console? It should, but let's make it happen here. So if we do, now I have a bunch of messy code here. Let's erase this for a second. Sure, our loop is closed. So if we did groceries.pop, it will print out the item that was popped, not the whole list. So the question was, if you do groceries.pop, is it going to remove the last item and show the rest of this? It will just show the last item removed. Okay. Any other questions on loops or anything that's on the screen right now? All right. So functions. Functions allow us to reuse a block of code without having to rewrite it multiple times. So the construction of a function is function, just like you do var for variable, the name of the function, and then in parentheses, you'll have parameters. So it'll be different information that you need in order to get the function to work. You can have 1 parameter, 0 parameters, 5 parameters, whatever you need in order to get your function to work. And then in curly brackets, you'll have the code that you're executing within your function. So if we go back here and solve our bacon problem here. So let's say we have check for bacon, right? So I'm going to say function check for bacon, and it's going to have some parameters. Let's call it the list. And in my list, I'm going to say, I'm going to do the list and then the item that we're looking for. So item. So if list, well, we'll do the for loop here. So for var I equals 0, we want I less than list.length. We'll do I plus plus. Then in there, I'm going to do my if statement. So if groceries, if list. Now notice I'm using my parameter name. So if list at I is equal to item, then I'm going to return true. Okay. All right, so I have my function here. So now if I go back here, I'm going to erase all this. And I'm going to say check for bacon. And the list is going to be groceries. And the item is going to be bacon. So now this is how I call for the function. So I write my function name and the parameters it needs. So it needs the list, which is groceries in this case, and then the item that we're looking for, which is bacon. And then this is going to return true or false. So if, then we can do if check for bacon. And that returns true. Then we can do console.log. Yay, bacon is on the list. And then if not, we can else groceries dot push bacon. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, make sure it all works. Oh, I have a bunch of consoles here. We just need this top one. Okay, now let's say it worked how we wanted it to, right? So it went to this function returned true. So yay, bacon is on the list, else we pushed bacon. So let's pretend bacon's not on the list. I'm gonna make bacon into cereal, okay? And then just so we can see, okay, so now bacon is no longer on the list. It's going to jump to this function and it's going to check to see if bacon's on the list. It's not on the list, so it'll go to the else statement, groceries.push bacon, and then we're going to console log the entire list. So let's see what that looks like. Just as expected. Milk, eggs, cereal, bananas, bacon. Any questions? This is kind of compounding everything that we learn into one thing. This is where the course starts picking up and things start getting a little bit crazier. So feel free to ask as many questions as you need in order to understand this.
Does the function have to go after the if and else statements, or can it come first?
No, you can declare your functions at the top. It doesn't matter. What it's going to do, your JavaScript, is it's going to search the whole file and look for a function called check for bacon. So common practice is to put your functions at the top, you know, kind of declare all the functions that you need at the top, and then towards the bottom is where you write out the code to execute.
Okay.
Any other questions? So we...
Yeah, let me ask you a question.
Go ahead.
For the console, are we using, is it still a web page that you're using for the console, like a browser?
Yeah, so the console is going to be in your browser. Different languages have different types of consoles. For JavaScript, at least, you can just open up the browser for your root file, which is my index.html file. Then you right-click, hit inspect, and then click on console.
Oh, okay, okay. Right-click, inspect. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on the code we've written? Everyone understand why I wrote list down here, an item here? Because these are the parameter names.
So real quickly on that, I'll kind of ask. So I understand the parameters are list and item.
Mm-hmm.
But the if statement at the bottom there is saying if, I'm going to have you finish that, if.
Can you see it?
Yeah, I see it.
So if list.
Right, what is that? I'm struggling to find out what, like.
Okay. Okay, I understand your question. So here, these are the parameters, right? These are the variables that are only in the scope of our function, right?
Right.
So if I wrote list out here, it's going to give me an error. List and item are only viewed between the code block of this function. Now, what is list? List is whatever you passed in when you called in for the function. So here, we're calling the function. So list in this case is groceries. What is groceries? Groceries is this array. Item is whatever you passed in with the when you called the function. So you'll hear the terms like call function or invoke function. That's essentially you asking the function to perform its actions. So item in this case matches up with bacon.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So now here we're really looking at groceries at index I, and we're setting it equal to bacon. But we have this generic because this could change, right? What if I wanted to check for something else? So I could call this, instead of check for bacon, I can just call it check for item. Let's say the item is grapes. And then we can push grapes here. And I can even make this even cleaner and make this variables. That way, if the item changes, I only need to change that in one place.
Okay. Right. Okay, that makes sense. I got it.
Okay, cool. Anyone else? All right, let's go ahead and jump into scope. So you just heard me talk about scope. Scope is the area in which your variables and functions can be accessed. There's different kinds of scope. We have global scope, which is declared outside of a block or function, and you can access it from anywhere. Function scope is declared within a function. It's accessed only from inside of the function. And block scope is fairly new. It's introduced in ES5. Through the use of the let keyword, gives us the ability to have a variable only available for the block that it lives in, aka inside of the curly brackets. So what we're talking about here, so list and item are function scope, right? If I use list and item out here, then it's not going to work. It's only in the scope of this function. Groceries is global scope, right? I have it defined outside of everything. So I could technically use groceries in here if I wanted to. Groceries is on a global scope. I can use it anywhere. Now, let's say if my if statement, I have a variable I want to use called new item. So let new item equal, let's say, some shrimp. Okay. Then this new item variable can only be used between these curly brackets. And that's where you'll see the word let. So notice I didn't use var, I used let. So that's like a temporary variable. We only need it for a short amount of time and only in this little section of code. So I'm going to let new item equal shrimp for the purpose of this little code block. Do we understand the differences between the different scopes, between global, block, and function scope?
Let me ask a question. Is it common for us to use let during when we're coding? Is it a common occurrence?
It is going to be something that's common and that you'll use later on. As far as the beginning parts of the course, you'll be using a lot of var. But once your programs start getting more complicated and more complex, there will be times where you'll need to use just like a temporary variable. And that's when you're going to use let. So later on in the program, yes. As of right now, no. But that is something that you need to be aware of. So when it does come, you know, in the back of your mind, oh yeah, there's that let keyword. Any other questions on scope? All right, we'll keep it trucking then. So next we're going to talk about DOM elements. This is where you're going to be interacting with your HTML element. So DOM stands for Document Object Model. It is a programming interface for HTML documents. it provides a visual representation of the HTML elements you placed in your document. So you were asking, how do I grab something from a user? So this is where the DOM comes into play. Now you can grab elements by ID, by tag name, by class name. There's different ones that you can do. I'm just going to show you get element by ID, but on your free time and when you're going through the course material, there are examples of others, so be sure to look at those and see the differences. But let's go ahead and play with one. So I'm going to comment all this out. And I have my script. So let's say I have a text area. Now I'm going to give it the ID of user input. Okay. So now I have my text area. Okay. So now if we look at our HTML, we see we have our little text area where I can write some text. Now, if I'm going to actually write in my console here. So now we know that the ID is what? User input. So now I'm going to grab a document by its ID. So I'll call it, let's have a variable called input. And cool thing about the console, it kind of expects what you're going to write. So document.get element by ID, and notice that these are in camel case. So camel case means the first letter is lowercase, and then the beginning of every word after that begins with a capital. And then it's parentheses, and then inside of quotations is going to be your ID name. So here, if we look at the code, the ID name is user input, and then the semicolon. So if we set that, and I type in input, we see that it's the entire text area. Right, so let's say I wrote la 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 la. Okay, now I'm going to say another variable called input value, and I'm going to do document dot get element by ID. Then I'm going to do user input. Then I'm going to do dot value. That gives me the actual text inside of the element. So here, without dot value, we get the whole thing, right? Some cases we want that, other cases we don't. In a case that we don't want that, we just want whatever the user put inside of that text area, that's where you're going to use dot value. And then now input value is equal to the string la 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 la. Okay? Does this make sense so far?
Oh, sorry, will you just please go over that again?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Will you please just go over that again from the text area on Atom?
Go over what specifically? How to create the text area, why I put an ID, or what
The
exactly?
user, the input part, like, you know, how you did the get document.get element by ID on Atom.
On Atom? I haven't touched it. Oh, right here? Is this what you're talking about?
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
From
so
there.
I just created a text area, and then in the opening tag, I created an ID, and I set that equal to an ID name. So now if I wanted to grab this entire element using JavaScript, that's when you use document.get element by ID, and then in quotations inside of the parentheses, you would put the ID name. So that's what I did here. And then that returned the entire element. So the whole thing, the opening and closing tag and things like that.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. And then dot value is going to grab whatever is inside of that text area. So let's say we had some, let's say I have an h1 tag, I have an ID equals result, and then I have it say hola, right? And I refresh my page here, and it says hola here, right? So then I'm going to say hello here, and I want to change hola to hello, right? Whatever the user wrote, I want it to change here. So what you do to do that is you're going to use inner HTML. So just the same as document.getElementById, and the ID that we want, because we want to change what's inside of here, is going to be the ID for this tag. So that ID is result. So I'm going to put result. And then we'll do dot inner, and then in all caps, HTML. And I'm going to set it equal to a value. Whatever I set this equal to is going to replace whatever is in between these tags. So I want it to be what the user put. So I'll do get element by ID. The ID I want in this case is user input, and I want it to be the value. So now this is hello. Right? If I put bananas here, it's now bananas. Right? Any questions on the inner HTML? Everyone feels good about this? Everyone understands? All right.
Well,
So
I'm sorry, I have a question. So why do you need to get the value? I mean, if you're setting it, why do you have to declare the value at the end? Like, why do you need to include dot value? Why can't you just leave it at user input with the?
if I removed this,
Yeah.
all right, let's see what that looks like. So we get an entire object. So when we're grabbing an element by ID, we're getting the entire element object. That's not what we want to print out there, right? We just want to print out the word that the user inputted or the text that the user inputted. And that's where dot value comes into play. Now, if you wanted to grab an entire element, then you would not use dot value. Now, you might be asking, when do I want to grab an entire element? That's when a button comes into play. So let's say we added a button here. Right? Now we're going to write a function that does everything that I just did in the console. Right? So now I'm going to do a button. Now I'm going to give it the ID of do something. I'll say click me. And I need my / here. Save that. Refresh. Okay. So now we have this click me button. So whenever we do, nothing happens, right? I haven't written any code that makes it do anything. So let's go back to our code here. So now, if we go down some so we can erase all that. So now I'm going to add an event listener to my button. So let's say I'm going to create a variable called button. I'm going to set it equal to document.getElementById. The ID was do something, and it is case sensitive, so you want to make sure you write it exactly how you wrote it here. So do something, and then now I can add an event listener to button. So button.add event listener. And then with add event listener, you write what you're listening for. So let's say I'm listening for a click. And then I want it to perform a function. So I'll call the function change text. Okay, so that means I need a function called change text. And then it's going to have a variable called user input. And I'm going to set that equal to document.get element by ID. The ID is user input dot value. So now this is going to equal whatever text is inside of the text area. And then I'm going to change the inner HTML of that H1. And that ID was result. So I'll put result here, then do dot inner HTML, and then I'm going to set it equal to user input. So now when I click the button, it should change the text. So let's see if it works. Wait, why did that OLED disappear? Oh, I needed to do window.onload. So this is where it's getting a little bit more complicated, because as you see here, when I'm refreshing, it pops up and then it disappears. So what you have to do is window.onload. Let me get, and this isn't something that you need to know how to do right away. But it shows you, it just shows you how to do an event listener. Now with that, you don't necessarily have to do it this way. You can use the attribute onClick for your button. So let's say we got rid of the event listener, right? Here. And we have this function change text, right? That's all we have written. So now when I click my button on click, I want to set it equal to change text, the function. So now when I click that button, it's going to jump to my JavaScript, and then it's going to go to the change text function. So if we refresh, it changes it for us. Now you could do it with the add event listener, but that's going to overcomplicate things. I would just use onClick for now, and then if you want to learn how to do add event listener, message me privately and we can go over that. But I don't want to confuse the class more so with that. All right, so that is the DOM. Any questions on that? All right, we'll keep it going then. So Chrome Inspector, that's what we've been using, so you should be already familiar with that, but just remember, it is your best friend. And how to get there is you right-click the page, click Inspect, and then go to the Console tab, which is what we've been doing throughout the class. And then we're going to go ahead and jump into the terminal. So before I jump into terminal, any last-minute JavaScript questions? All right, so the terminal is an interface in which you can type and execute text-based commands. It's normally used to a GUI. So essentially when we are working through our computer here, we can right-click, do new folder, all that cool stuff, right? Terminal will do it for us too. So with the terminal, before I start writing commands here, these are some basic commands that you'll be using in the terminal. So it's different depending on the operating system that you have. I have a Mac, so you're going to be seeing Mac commands. If you have a Windows, these are going to be your commands. There's a list, a cheat sheet list. Message me if you want it. I could send you the link. And then this describes what they do. So ls lists the files in a current directory. CD changes the directory where commands are run. MV moves a file to a new location. CP copies a file, RM deletes a file. And it's different for Windows, but kind of the same. It's just a little bit different. So if we look at the terminal, I'm going to make this bigger so y'all can see it a little bit better. All right, so if I do ls, I can see everything that's in this directory. So I'm going to go to my desktop. So I'm going to change directory, cd desktop, right? I'm going to ls there, see what's all in there. And let's say I wanted to make a new project folder. So I'm going to mkdir, which is make directory, and then I'm going to call it new project. Okay, so now if I do ls there, we can see new project should be on here somewhere. New project, here it is. All right, so now I'm going to change directories into new project. Now I'm in that new project folder, and let's say I wanted to create an index.html file. I'm going to do touch index.html. Say I needed a CSS file, style.css, and let's say I need a JavaScript file, JS. And now if I check what's in my folder, we see we have index.html, script.js, and style.css. So you'll see a lot of developers using the terminal. The terminal can do a lot of things that, you know, clicking a mouse can't do. And it's also really fun. I like it. It makes me feel like I'm a 90s hacker. But that's the terminal. So you'll use this to create projects. You don't have to do it this way. Some companies want you to know the terminal, so it's definitely good to learn. I do have extra reading material if you want to learn more about the terminal. You can do a lot of things through here. I'm definitely not going to go over that now, but if you want to learn more about that, definitely send me a private message and we can go over that. But those are the basics of the terminal. And throughout the course, you'll have to download things through the terminal. So definitely feel somewhat comfortable with it because you will be using it in the future. Any questions on the terminal?
Let me ask. Now, like for Windows 10, is it like finding the command line on Windows 10 or?
Yeah, it's a command line on Windows.
Okay, how do you get that on Windows 10? Because I was trying to do it last night. I was not able to get there.
I'm not exactly sure because I'm not a Windows user, but we can definitely look at that separately. Just send me a message and then we can jump on a quick code review, or on the next code review with your mentor, you can ask them.
Okay.
All right. So here with the file organization, when you're looking at a project, you'll have your root folder. So in this case, it would be the new project folder. And then you might have subdirectories in there. So let's say you have an images folder with images files. You might have a JavaScript folder with another folder inside of there, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of looks like a little family tree, but this is essentially the file organization. If you don't know what's in a file and you're working with the terminal, you can always do ls, like we just did. Okay, so quickly we're going to jump into source control. I kind of went over time today, so forgive me if I rush through this, but if you don't understand, feel free to send me a message and we can set up some time. Source control is essentially a tool that allows developers to manage file changes throughout the development process. It allows each developer to write and test code on their own computer without interfering with another developer's workflow. It allows developers to work simultaneously with teammates. It allows developers to go back in time and trace the source of bugs, and it allows us to easily version our code. So essentially what that means is once you get into project phase and you have maybe 5 people on your team, there's going to be a master project, right? And then you have someone doing the front end, someone doing the back end, someone doing middleware. whatever it is, or maybe this person's working on this feature and this person's working on that feature. Now, let's say Bob is working on a feature and he pushes it to the master and it messes everything up. And you're like, dang it, Bob. It's like, you ruined everything. So what source control is going to do is going to allow Bob to work on his own version of the project while the main version remains intact. And once it's been tested and it works, then you can merge it into the main one, and now it's one happy project. So that way it gives each developer the ability to work on whatever they need to work on at the same time without messing up the main one. So that's why it's called source control. Also, with source control, you'll be using Git Kraken, which integrates with GitHub. So you should sign up for a GitHub account. So if you go to github.com, I'm already signed in. So if I sign out, you can sign up, and then you'll sign up, and then you'll have a GitHub account. So if we sign in, we can see all the things that I'm working on here, and then we can also look at my different repos and things like that. You can have different organizations. So I'm attached to CoderCamp, so I can go and jump into the CoderCamp repo. I can jump into my own, whatever I need. Now, you also need to download Git Kraken. Now, you can work with GitHub through the command line if you're feeling adventurous, but we ask for the beginning to download Git Kraken. So once you download Git Kraken, you will get a screen like this. Once you open it, then you're going to click on this little project folder, and then you're going to clone a repo. Now, before you clone a repo, you are going to create one. So let's say I have a new repository. I click this plus button, and then you give it a name, test repo, and let's put a dash here. Put a little description. This is a test. You're going to make it public. You're going to initialize the repo with a README file, and then you'll leave these settings alone, and then you'll create repository. Okay, and now when you go to Git Kraken, you can clone through github.com, and it is already connected. So when you initially download Git Kraken, you'll connect it to your GitHub, and then you'll see the repos here, and then you can click on the one that you want to do. So we had, what did we call it? It's not populating here. Okay, well, the repo I just made is not popping up, but let's pretend it did. So we'll do a lecture example. Okay, none of these. And we'll say lecture. We'll just go to desktop. Oh, oops. So here I want to clone it to my desktop, open, and now I can clone my repo. So now I have cloned my repo here. So you can see here we have the master, and then here we can right click and create a branch. So let's say Bob wants to create a branch because he's working on something. So we'll call it Bob, and now Bob can work on his stuff. So if you want to add something, you can do, if you make changes. So let's say we opened that file here. Let's see, which one did I do? There are too many files here. I think I did lecture. So let's say with lecture, I'm going to open it with Adam, and I'm going to add a new file. I'm going to say index.html. I'm going to write some code. I'm going to save it. And now if we go to get Kraken, we see that something has been added here. So we take a look at that. And then we see the changes. And then we're going to stage the file. And then we are going to commit. So I'm going to say added index file. Right, so whenever you get a change, so there'll be times where you'll have code and you change the headings or you change the functionality or you change something. So what you want to do is you want to stage your file and then you want to put a little comment onto what happened. Then you're going to commit your changes to the file and then those changes have been saved. But they've been saved to Bob's branch and not the master. Okay. So I've shown you all that. So that kind of wraps up my lecture for today. If you have any questions, now's the time to ask. If you're shy about asking questions, feel free to message me on Slack, but I do encourage you to ask them now because I'm pretty sure someone else has the exact same question. Any questions on JavaScript, Get Kraken, the terminal?
So just download the Get Kraken and GitHub as well.
Yeah, so first you want to create an account with GitHub.
Okay.
And then you want to download Get Kraken. And the curriculum really breaks it down step by step on how to use Get Kraken. I kind of just ran through it because we're out of time.
Of course, yeah.
But you can go step by step. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. And then you just download it here. And it's for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So it should automatically detect what kind of operating system you have. So you should be able to click download free. Or if it doesn't, you just do see all platforms and download whichever one you need.
Okay, yeah, no, I just wanted to know if we needed to get Kraken and GitHub or just, yeah.
Yeah,
so
you're going to need them both.
Okay, both. Okay, cool.
Yep. Any other questions? And just a side comment on GitHub. GitHub, I highly, highly, highly recommend every project that you do, make a repo on it. And it shows how active you are. So this is something employers look at when you're applying for jobs. It will ask for your GitHub account. And then just like how they ask for your LinkedIn account, and then they check out your LinkedIn, for developers, they're going to check out your GitHub account. So it's really good to be as active on here. I am a bad developer in that sense that I haven't been pushing onto GitHub when I should have. But the more active this looks, they have it changed for Halloween. But here we see in November, I was pretty active here. So this is kind of a go-to for employers. So get used to it, play with it, practice with it, put all your projects on there so people can see what you've been working on. Any last questions before I wrap up? I know I went over a lot of information today, so it's a lot to absorb. But go ahead, rewatch the video, go over curriculum, and make sure you're scheduling your reviews with your mentors. That's very key to success. Any last questions? All right, looks like everyone's good to go. If you do, you know where to find me. Thank you for showing up. Have a good one.